Welcome back to the lab with your host, Brad Bolt. Welcome back to the lab. Back to the lab. Welcome back to the lab. Back to the lab.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Brad Bolt Show. I'm your host, Brad Bolt. Joining me is the host of the Saturday Air Raid. He is, I'm not sure if you're watching this on YouTube, if you can tell by his attire what team he is a fan of. It's a little bit inconspicuous, but it is our good friend, John Roberts. John, how are you, mate?
Notice no jersey is present because my Jackson Smith and Jigba retro throwback jersey has not arrived yet. Thank you, Seahawks Pro Shop, for delaying that one even further. And I have not brought myself to wear Russell Wilson at all. He's not even repping behind me. I have Justin Herbert because we're doing the West today, baby.
We are, and this is going to be fun just for the pure fact that you look at some of the teams in here, and this is just, there's a couple teams in here I'm really looking forward to dive into just to see their off season and how everything's panned out.
There is the spectrum of all spectrums on this show tonight.
Exactly. You got it's best and worst is really on display in this one. So if you are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, please like and subscribe on the channels or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get it. And we will reference a little bit in this, as of recording this, it is Wednesday, the 30th of August, our time. So we have had the roster cut down day in here. So there will be a show that's coming out this Saturday for the Saturday Air Raid where we go through some of these players. So we'll reference them a little bit, but for the rest of our thoughts, you'll be able to hear some of them on this Saturday Air Raid show. So I think since we are talking the West and we have our resident Seahawk fan in the building tonight, I think we shall start with the Seattle Seahawks. So
let's do it.
John, the Seahawks win-loss total that I checked and I double-checked and I triple-checked just before we started is 8.5 wins.
I've got them at 8 wins and 9
Really?
losses. So that's interesting. And that's with going 5-1 in the division as well. So yeah, usually I'll like try and split the difference when it comes to the divisional opponents. But obviously it's kind of tricky to do that this year when you've got the Cardinals and we don't know what we're going to get just yet from the Rams. The other thing about the Rams is we play them week 1. So we kind of got our full healthy team put together versus I guess you'd call it their full healthy team. However, it's still not probably the team that they would want to field had they the opportunity to decide. But I'm sure they're happy with their Super Bowl. So, yeah, I can't actually go back through and see who the losses were to. But I know we opened with LA. I really like that game for a win. And then we played Detroit. I also like us to win that game as well because I'm, as you remember from the North show, not as high on the Lions as I think some other people are. But we had we nailed another draft, which I was really happy about. And we've had a good cut down day. We were just talking about it just before we jumped on. Like, I'm really happy with the 53 roster we put together. It's pretty much the way I would have done it. And I think a lot of people in the Seahawks community feel that way as well. We weren't sure about what was going to happen with the main guys were Kobe Bryant, Artie Burns, and the other one, I'm forgetting. Damn, I was talking about him earlier. It might have been Kenny McIntosh or someone like that. Or Jake Bobo. I think it was Jake Bobo.
Yeah.
But no, I think we had a really good, they all made the team. I think we've put together a really, really good list.
Yeah, I really like it. I was in a way, I was actually hoping secretly that Kobe Bryant wouldn't have made the 53 because I would have loved to have seen him on Carolina, just because I would have I really like Kobe Bryant. He was obviously in college. He was opposite Sauce Gardner. So, he actually, he was a 6th round pick, I believe, in last year's draft.
I'd have to bring that up.
Can't remember, but I really liked Kobe. I thought so. I'm glad that he made the team for your sake, but for my sake, I would have loved to have seen him on the Panthers if he didn't make the 53. But I really like what they've done with their team. I mean, bringing in Draymond Jones, Julian Love, Jaron Reed, bringing those guys in to really solidify that
Just
defensive side of the ball.
the Denver fodder we can and turning them into superstars.
Exactly, but like I like what they've done, and even the guys that you mainly lost in Rashard Penny, Cody Barton, Shelby Harris, like it's sort of it. When healthy, Rashard Penny, I do believe, is one of the better running backs in the league. Like he just looks like if you dropped him in, if you came from another planet and you sat down and you watched the game when Rashard Penny was healthy and you see him rush the ball 20 times and go for 170 yards, you'd be like, he's got to be the best player in the NFL.
Yeah.
But you just never, I think Seattle fans got so used to not having him in the side that it's not really as big a loss as what maybe it might, so other people might think.
I don't know about that. I was upset about losing Rashard Penny for sure. You got to remember this. This is a team that's had high hopes for CJ Procise that just flamed out. We had Thomas Rawls, who we thought could be a thing, but it flamed out. We tried to bring Marshawn Lynch back in his sort of golden years, and it was good, and it was like a nice novelty. And then we've sort of always been trying to find answers at the position for a while. We've got Kenny Walker, which I think everyone's really happy about, and we've brought in Zach Charbonnet. I think honestly, we brought in Zach Charbonnet mainly to take the load, like a heavy workload, away from Ken Walker, because it's a lot to put on a second-year player. DJ Dallas is a nice sort of third down kind of guy, and maybe inside 2 minutes as well. And then we got Kenny Mack to spell all three of those guys. But so I think that they're going to be like a really, really good sort of 1-2 punch combination. So that's what we might have seen out of Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram back in the day, where they were sort of like that thunder and lightning tandem. They are sort of stylistically very different players. And I know that I can't imagine Pete Carroll putting too much on Zach Charbonnet to begin the season as well. Wouldn't be surprised if Ken Walker's the guy for the first sort of 4 to 6 weeks, and then they sort of spell him, then they bring in Zach Charbonnet. This is a team that just wants to stay healthy, I feel.
Yeah, we obviously all know that Pete Carroll loves to run the ball. So I think I actually really like the running back room as a whole, just because of all the pieces that can be filled. Because even if you happen to lose Ken Walker and Charbonnet becomes your guy, well, you've got DJ Dallas there. You've got Kenny McIntosh who can fill those roles. You've got pieces that can complement, and everyone can sort of, it feels like, can step up into that next person's role if they had to, if that makes sense. If Charbonnet goes down, well, you sort of have confidence that DJ Dallas can step up into, or Kenny Mack can step up into that role.
If we lose one of these guys, we've got such good depth at the moment in both positions. The other thing is the whole Pete Carroll loves to run the ball. I mean, Pete Carroll, honestly, he likes to run the ball as much as anyone else. Last season, we were I can't remember the exact, we were somewhere between 14th to 17th most run heavy team. We actually, realistically, we're right in the middle of the NFL. We were throwing the ball just as much. And I think that's because, Gino gave Pete Carroll a lot of confidence in being able to do that. Whereas I don't feel like they could have done that with Russell Wilson in years past, because there was always that risk of turning the ball over, which Pete Carroll hates during the let Russ cook era. So yeah, I think we're in a really good position at the moment. Just even some of the other guys that we brought in who are yet to play for the team, like Julian Love. I thought he was a great player on the Giants, and I'm stoked to have him on our team. Devin Bush, he's doing, he started off really hot in Pittsburgh, and then he sort of cooled for a while there, and I can see why he's not playing on the team anymore. But he's one of those players who I think would thrive in the right team environment, and I feel like that's where he is now as well. And then Jamal Adams back as well is going to be awesome, I feel.
And I think too, the good thing with having Devin Bush, I actually skipped over one of the additions or the returns of bringing back Bobby Wagner.
Yeah, of course.
if you're going to have Devin Bush, because if people have forgotten too, Devin Bush was a 10th overall pick
Yeah.
in the draft that he went in. So like he obviously got the talent there. It's just I
Yeah.
think it was the Pittsburgh. They had so many other people there. I believe he had an injury at one stage, so that put him back a little bit. So he just might be a guy who just needed to change scenery to reinvigorate and unlock that potential. But
And think about the linebacker position, like the off-ball linebacker position is like, it's hard to evaluate. Of course, we can evaluate Bobby Wagner and everyone knows he's amazing. And of course, Micah Parsons is amazing. But like, think about even like a few years ago, Blake Martinez, great player for the Packers, went to the Giants because they could see he was a really, really great player. And then he just sort of flamed out. Like linebacker, I feel like it's almost like the running back position. Like it's a tricky one to evaluate, and players come and go all the time, unless you're just like the most star-studded of stars.
well, you think of it now, the one that makes one of the best examples of this is Jalen Smith was a Pro Bowl linebacker in Dallas,
Yeah,
and then he was cut after having a couple bad years, and then he was on the Giants, and then he was off the Giants, and then he was signed to the Saints. The Saints have just cut him on the cut down day. So,
yep,
he's another guy who, before his injury in college, was being looked at as a first round talent
right.
and started off really well within the NFL, and now he's almost one of those journeyman type of guys who all of a sudden you go, oh, I didn't realize he was on this team until he pops up, and it's so
Yeah,
it is like you said,
think.
it's really hard to pick who's going to be good and who's not from that position, unless you are a guy like a Micah Parsons or a Bobby Wagner for most of his career. So,
Oh,
um, that as you mentioned at the top, Seattle had a really good draft class again. I mean, you'd think back to last year's draft, we thought they struck gold by two starting tackles
yeah,
last year, and then getting Tariq Woolen and Kenneth Walker. So all these guys just kept piling through, and you're like, wow, it's going to be hard for Seattle to top that again. Now we don't know because we haven't seen them play, but it
yeah.
sort of feels like again they've really hit on these talents that everyone like. Now, like I said, we're not sure because we haven't seen them play real NFL games yet, but based off of pre-draft stuff, Seattle hit a lot of these guys who everyone was so high on. So out of their draft picks, who were your sort of upper echelon, your favorite picks that were from this draft that's just happened?
So for sure, I mean, it has to be the first two picks. When we did the draft live, like the Devin Witherspoon pick was I didn't see that coming. I can't even remember at the time what your reactions were, but we were all talking like, okay, we're going to go edge, we're going to go D line here. This is going to be a big step for us. Or were we going to go quarterback? I think had been like fluffed around if it was like a Will Levis type or something like that. But getting Devin Witherspoon was such a great call from the team. And I feel like to pair him, with like, it's I think it's kind of lifted people like Kobe Bryant as well, making the team to pair him with like Tariq Woolen, Quandre Diggs is back there, Trey Brown is going to be there with Julian Love and the sort of the more veteran presence. I feel like that's in a really good position to thrive. But man, to be able to say like we have Jackson Smith and Jigba on our team, having watched him at Ohio State for so many years and seen him with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and all these guys who are absolute stars. And then you're looking at the box score, even if you just wanted to watch the box score, and he's got like the best stats of all of them. Like that fills you with so much confidence. And I've just seen on Twitter that he's back at practice already from his wrist surgery. So he's practicing.
Yeah, and it honestly it feels like now, as we said, there's still time for everything to pan out. We haven't actually seen, but Jackson Smith and Jigba feels like one of those picks that in 5 years' time we're going to look back on this draft the same way that we've looked back on that 2020 draft and went, how did
Yeah.
Justin Jefferson go 26th or 25th or whatever he went?
Yeah.
It feels like that with Jackson Smith and Jigba. We're going to sit back on this time and go, how did he fall there?
Yeah.
Like, what were people thinking?
Yeah. I know it was lucky. It was a great call. And, like you sort of think like, oh, is he actually like a positional need that we needed? But that sort of like slot receiver, I think is perfect for him, given that DK is just always, screaming down the sideline. Tyler Lockett he'll definitely be around for another year or two. But at the same time, this is going to be great for him to pick up. And like I was saying before, the other receivers who made the team, like Derek Young, he was our 7th-round pick last year. He's still kicking around. Apparently, like there's really good things from him. Unfortunately, D. Eskridge has been suspended for some domestic violence issues, so we won't see him. He's suspended for a while, so I think we won't see him for at least 6 weeks. But I'd be surprised if he even makes the team, given he's our 2nd-round pick from a few years ago, and that feels to say 2nd-round pick that he's kind of just never became anything. But even our tight ends, like Noah Fant, I'm a really high guy on Noah Fant. Same with Will Dissly, has always been good. And even Colby Parkinson was good last year. Gino really likes him. Like, I just feel like everywhere we look, sort of at skill position, I'm really happy about our back 7. I'm happy about now. Look, how's that going to translate to the season? Because they were good. They were good on paper last year. And then they were also at the same time sort of like historically bad last year. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, no, I'm excited.
No, well, you've got them at 8. I've got them over. I really like this team, and if I think the big thing will it'll all come down for me. It'll come down to Gino. Is this going to be Gino that we had from last year, and how he plays, or is this going to be one of those ones where, as people say, like he turns back into a pumpkin, and he goes back to, but then so. I actually do think that Gino's going to be good again. So I think that they will I think they'll finish 2nd in the division. But I still think that they'll be pushing for one of those wildcard playoff spots.
Yeah, so that's basically where I have them. And then the other thing about that as well is I think I'm too high on the 49ers. We'll get to them in a sec, but like I've got the Seahawks for 9 losses. So just looking at where those will come from, week 5 are against the Bengals. We're going to Cincinnati for that game as well. We've got to play the Browns and the Steelers and the Ravens. So, we could very much get swept by those teams, because you got to think about, like last year, the NFC South swept us. All teams, the Falcons, Bucks, and Saints, they all beat us. We've got to play the Eagles. We've got to play the Steelers, like I was saying. Titans are in there, like Cowboys. Like there are some tough matchups in there outside of our divisional opponents.
Yeah, I don't have them being. I think I'm opposite of you. You have them 8 and 9. I was sort of thinking around that 9 and 8 sort of mark. Like I wouldn't be surprised for them to pull off one of those games, whether it be the Steelers or the Ravens, or, one of those. I think they might pull one of those off. But yeah, I have probably a slight over for the Seahawks this year, and really looking forward to see how that team pans out for the season with the draft picks and how that all works out. And just to see Jackson Smith and Jigba in the NFL is going to be a fun thing to watch this year. So
for sure. And just to finish what we're talking about with Seattle, like making the playoffs last season, I was saying this on my show last week with Dan, was making the playoffs last year was such a surprise. Like with he's at with his Packers at the moment, you're sort of like, oh man, if we can piece like 5 wins together, that'd be great. Like this time last year, it was sort of like we were all just like, yeah, like if we can get the number 1 pick, sure, that'd be great. Then all of a sudden, halfway through the season, it's like, holy crap, if we can make the playoffs, that would be amazing. That happened. So I feel like we've got quite high expectations this season. But like I'm dead set serious when I say this. NFC Championship, that is sort of like as high as I think that we can take this team. Now, a lot of that depends on the rest of the NFC being the NFC, and it's not insanely competitive. Like when you think about it, the main teams we have to overcome are the 49ers, our divisional rival, who we have had the better part of for many, many years, although not recently. And then the Eagles and the Cowboys would be the tough ones as well. But outside of that, I think we can be competitive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can move now on to the team that you mentioned within your own division, the San Francisco 49ers, who over-under win total is 10.5 wins. So I'm going to be interested to see where I believe you would have them as an over, but I'm curious to see how over you would have them.
I'm way over. And I would almost say, like, I need to update this projection thing that I've done, because I have not done that since long before preseason. I have them at like 14-3. So
that wouldn't surprise me, though.
Four wins coming from within the division right there. And then, I mean, the rest of their schedule, let's bring it up. I mean, it's going to be similar to Seattle's. Like, we've got to play the AFC North. And then that's where I kind of feel like the 49ers are probably in a more sort of equipped to do so. Now, having said that, week one they played the Steelers, and I think the Steelers will actually win that game. They do have some like better matchups against like Jags, for example. But they also play the the NFC East with us. So they've got the Eagles, Cowboys again. I'm just trying to see who are their different opponents from us. Yeah, they've got a game against the Vikings as well. So yeah, I kind of see them getting the better half of a lot of those games that I don't think that we might. But I've got to adjust my expectations now that Trey Lance is gone.
Well, that talking about Trey Lance, I actually think maybe their biggest loss is actually going to be Jimmy Ward.
Oh yeah,
Like Jimmy Ward's was a real integral part of that team, and I guess Al-Shaair, Aziz Al-Shaair, he's at Tennessee now. He's another big loss, but they bring in Javon Hargrave to that already scary sort of that defensive line. Now, obviously, they have like Nick Bosa and those sorts of guys, but they just Armstead. But they got Chris Kasurik is the defensive line coach there, and every time that someone appears like, oh, is this person ever going to live up to their potential? We don't think so. They get them at San Francisco and he turns them around. So they've got Cleveland Ferrell there this year.
Yeah.
So, it's just going to be some of those sorts of guys coming on that back end that, it'll just be interesting to see how they step up because, they have lost a couple of their defensive players, but that's when I think of the San Francisco 49ers, I don't always think like my first thought is actually to that defensive line and how scary they are and that defense. It's not always straight to Kyle Shanahan and his offensive mastermind. So it'll just be interesting to see how, with a couple of those guys gone, how that's going to change their defense this year.
Yeah, and even think about Talanoa, Hufanga, like they sort of really struck lightning in a bottle with him last season. I felt like he was playing out of his mind and way better than anyone expected. Now they got Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner, so like there's still the scary linebackers, and then we'll see how they go in their backfield this time around. The one thing that I need to readjust my expectations of with the 49ers is mostly on the offensive side of the ball, because I know we all know Kyle Shanahan is who he is. What happens if Brock Purdy is just not the guy? It's a very real possibility.
Well, and that's the thing. So you move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. So you always knew what you had in Jimmy Garoppolo. Like Kyle Shanahan's always had that. They spend a lot of draft capital to move up and select Trey Lance. Then he sits behind Jimmy G, comes out and gets injured. And we played one game in a monsoon and then got injured in the first quarter of the next game that he played. So that's when you have your Brock Purdy comes in. As you said, if Brock Purdy isn't the Brock Purdy of who he was towards that back end of last season, because he's coming off a UCL injury, which is sort of very handy for a quarterback to have properly working elbows and shoulders and things. But then now with Trey Lance gone, traded to Dallas, it's Sam Darnold. We saw what Sam Darnold did in New York.
But yeah.
I know what Sam Darnold did in Carolina. He was better last season in the back end of the season when he came back from injury. It's probably maybe the best Sam Darnold type of performances he's had in the NFL consistently, because he was a pretty consistent quarterback over that stretch. He wasn't a world beater, but he was good enough to get Carolina wins and not make too many mistakes. But as you said,
if I came back in time and from a month from now and said, hey guys, Sam Darnold's the starter and Brock Purdy lost the job, is anyone surprised by that? I don't find that shocking at all.
No, I think if it was just Brock Purdy would was so bad that you might end up having someone go, well, you've got to tell us what happened there. Like, it must have been the elbow. It must have been this. Because the other thing too is that the other part that I question a bit is their offensive line,
Yeah.
because they lose Mike McGlinchey this year, and they didn't really feel those, like, that's been one of their things. Like, they seem to have had really good offensive line the last couple of years, but what happens if Trent Williams gets injured? What happens if some of their starters that they have now, if they get injured? What's going to happen to that Kyle Shanahan type of offense, that run game, with how they can utilize Christian McCaffrey, Debo, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk? Like, how's that all going to work? And then, as you said, if one of those offensive linemen gets injured, and then you have Brock Purdy being hit every which way from Sunday because that offensive line is like a sieve, like, you might see Sam Darnold be a starting quarterback by week 4 or week 5. And what happens to the San Francisco 49ers from there?
And this is the thing about the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, is the only thing that's really stopped him is injury to date. Like, it's almost like he just sort of can't get out of his own way as it stands right now, or I don't know what it is about that, Santa Clara, but yeah.
So
if they season, that would be phenomenal. I just don't see it.
And so, like, even you look at, like, in their draft, their first 2 draft picks didn't happen until the 3rd round because of the follow-on effects of the Trey Lance trade and the Christian McCaffrey trade to bring them in. So their first pick was Jake Moody.
Yeah.
So they traded up.
Yeah.
They traded up to get a kicker, which, even Kyle Shanahan admitted, like, my friends are making fun of me for trading up to take a kicker in the 3rd round. And then their next pick was Cameron Latu, who was a tight end. So, it's...
Having said that, when it comes to positional need, is there a really positional need there for them? Like,
probably,
what position would they have fulfilled that we would have gone, oh yeah, that makes sense, or that's good, or we accept that? I don't know. I just feel like I always kind of just trust Kyle Shanahan at this point. And I feel like John Lynch has lost the job of being able to draft people since Trey Lance.
So just looking at some of the guys who went after Jake Moody and Cameron Latu. So they had Mekhi Blackman.
Yeah, okay.
So, they could have had a corner there. Now, I'm not sure what Mekhi Blackman's going to be like in the NFL, but one of the things is last year they had Diomedor Lenore stepped up to play really well for them in the season, but he's now the starter.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, like, when you have a guy who's maybe a bench guy or whatever, who steps in and, plays in that role really well and does really well and stands out, then when they come back the next season as the starter, is there a different level that you're going to be looking at this player? Because you're like, well, last year you're a bench guy who stepped in and did so well, but now you're the starter. So now there's more pressure on you. There's more scrutiny of your game, sort of thing. But so they had him. Keely Ringo went afterwards. Jacorian Bennett, who's one of my favorite guys, like, he went to Las Vegas. This was after they had Nick Sautaviri, who's an offensive lineman. Anthony Bradford, who went to your Seahawks, another offense. You know what I mean? Like, they could have. There's some of these other. I mean, not that they needed it, but you had Chandler Zavala went to Carolina, and now Zavala looks like, with Austin Corbett on the pup list, Zavala looks like he's going to be the starting right guard for the Panthers.
Yeah.
So it's just some of these guys. I mean, you had Roshan Johnson was still there available.
I mean, so there's lots of people. It is a weird thing to do. At least so they weren't like Cleveland who was the team that drafted the kicker we were boasting about and then cut him? He didn't make the team. I think it was
Cade York, yeah. Cleveland, they just cut him.
So, at least he looked good in preseason. Although I was watching them against the Chargers in preseason, and apparently they didn't have a kicker because they were both injured. So that is a bit.
It's just, I think, as you said, a lot of this ends up defaulting to, in Kyle Shanahan we trust, and he's got his vision for the way he likes his things to be done. But it's just, and I understand their thought process of taking Jake Moody is because a lot of people had a fourth round, sort of a fourth round grade on him, and listening to like that sort of where listening back to the live draft show that the Athletic did with Nate Tice, Robert Mays, and Dane Brugler. They both had him as the back end of the fourth, early fifth round sort of pick.
Yeah.
The 49ers didn't have a pick in the fourth round, and their next pick was the back end of the fifth round.
Yeah.
So, I understand the thought process of trading up because they were obviously looking to move on from Robbie Gold. So it was moving up to get their kicker of the future, which I understand. But, it's just one of those things that when you lose so much draft capital in making these moves for Christian McCaffrey and Trey Lance, and McCaffrey has worked out for them already. Like Christian McCaffrey is one of the best, if not the best, running back in the NFL with his big playability and his versatility. But the Trey Lance trade, to have that not pan out, and then to have now they've traded him to Dallas and they got a fourth round pick back, and that was it. Is sort of, it's trading. What did you mention at the week? The trade. What was the Trey Lance ended up being his trade, and the picks that ended up.
Get from it.
Yeah, it was Tyreek Hill.
It was Bradley Chubb, and they drafted Jalen Waddle with their pick that they got.
That they're not saying they would have been able to get Tyreek Hill, but just thinking, if they were able to if they had have stayed where they were, and waited to see how that happened, and you could have had Jalen Waddle, to throw in that team, or just offensive line, whatever it might have been, because that was also the draft with Rashawn Slater.
Yeah.
There was people around, so it was just to not be able to utilize that full first round quarterback contract and already have sent him off to another team. It's not gonna bode well for the 49ers, especially when you lose that draft capital. So were there any other moves that you liked of the 49ers before we move on to the other teams?
No, look, again, like they're so crippled by their draft capital, and their off-season moves were kind of limited. They've more or less have sort of like stayed the same. I guess the big one was Trey Lance from that. Yeah, I think like Shanahan just really wants to run it back, and I feel like this season he's really going to get a chance to do it his way, the way he wants. I think they're going to really hope that there's not too many injuries to worry about. We'll probably see them back in the playoffs and the championship game. It'll be interesting to see who their opponent is, but like hopefully they fall apart
for your sake.
Yes. Sorry, Niners fans.
So I'm with you though. I do have them as an over of 10.5. If you had gone in the future and you tell me you come back at this season and the 49ers went 15-2, I wouldn't be shocked. Like they have so much talent everywhere else, so it wouldn't surprise me. But so moving on now to the LA Rams, whose over under win total is 6.5 wins. So JR, what is your thoughts on the 6.5 wins for the LA Rams?
Yeah, so I've got them 4-13, and I'm probably a bit too low on them. I do have to admit. I can't see this team having a very good year on either side of the ball, really. Like, we're getting even now reports that Matthew Stafford, and I think this is from his wife's podcast show, that they were saying that he's struggling to connect with all the young draft picks that they've brought in. Okay, so they're like, that's fine. It's just a headline talking point. But apparently he's been saying like he feels very old and he feels worn down. And I kind of feel like the win of the Super Bowl hasn't quite worn off on them yet, where I really feel like they've lost that fire to get back there, be competitive, win another Super Bowl. And it kind of shows when you look at the team. Like, they've got Aaron Donald, of course. They've got Cooper Kupp, of course. But then you sort of start to patch it together, and like, NFL, it's a team sport. You can't just sort of get by with sort of one or two guys here. I'm wondering, like, so let's look at their schedule to start for the Rams. So they start with my Seahawks, of course. Then they play the 49ers. Then they play the Bengals. They'll have an interesting matchup against the Colts, but then they play the Eagles.
Mm.
Like that, they got a tough start to the season.
Yeah.
They were really hampered by injury last season, I will say. So maybe things come back around for them there. But I find this team to get really hard to get really excited about, which I didn't have that problem in years past.
No, and it seems like there was talk in the off season that Matthew Stafford may be retiring. There was talk that maybe Sean McVay was going to go to TV. So it sort of seems like they've kept enough guys or a couple of the big names around long enough just to try and keep Sean McVay there to see what he might be able to do and rebuild that team. But
I think the thing keeping him there is the thought that they might land Caleb Williams.
yeah, that's
Sort of project for the next 5 years to keep him entertained.
Yeah, and I mean, they're when you look as well in their off-season moves, I went to try and look at where I've been getting a lot of this. ESPN during at the end of the major part of free agency had marquee additions and marquee subtractions that they were going through, and they're looking. And you look at their subtractions, and it's Jalen Ramsey, Bobby Wagner, Leonard Floyd are their marquee subtractions. When you go and you look at their marquee additions, it literally comes up and says none. There was no.
Is the only one I can think of.
Yeah, like it's. Yeah, like I was trying to.
Who else?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's
John Johnson's back from Cleveland. I like
John Johnson.
Down stint in Cleveland, but he was always good on the Rams.
But it's even like some of their fringe guys like Troy Hill, who went back and was a good slot corner for them. He's in Carolina now. It's that they've lost. Greg Gaines is in Tampa Bay. Like he was another good guy on the defensive line who in that Super Bowl year was a really handy piece next to Aaron Donald. It's sort of they've lost these guys, but and I think they've been one of those teams too who has been hamstrung by their I guess had the ability to the Les Snead F them picks. Like it's
mortgage the future. And as I was reading Bill Belichick was saying, or maybe like this is just a headline, so he might not have said this, but he looks at like teams like the Rams now and what they've done and how uncompetitive they are now, and he says like he doesn't want any part of that.
Well, I mean, they made, and I think if you were to ask the Rams, they would do that trade 10 times out of 10 in Goff and 2 first-round picks for Matthew Stafford. They would do that because it got them the Super Bowl.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But then they obviously weren't expecting to finish so bad last year that their pick ended up being the 6th overall pick to the Lions, who then were able to maneuver around and ended up with Jahmyr Gibbs,
right,
as that pick. So,
even they're cut down today. So their quarterbacks going into the season will be Matthew Stafford and Stetson Bennett, and that's it. Like Stetson Bennett is starting games this year in the NFL. He is. Matthew Stafford is not playing 17 games.
I would be awfully shocked if Stafford starts all 17 games.
So what are we talking about here? Like this is a team that realistically, the Arizona Cardinals, who everyone says is absolute garbage, the Arizona Cardinals could beat this team. I'm trying to say, like, do they play the Texans at all this year? They don't. Damn, that would have been a good matchup as well. It's so hard to predict. Like they could go either way. They could be competitive in a few games. I think that the season will sort of catch up with them quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think like I liked a couple of their their draft picks. Like I like Kobe Turner, who was a defensive tackle they picked in the 3rd round. Steve Avila was their 2nd round pick.
One sort of pick that I think is good, that I like.
Yeah. I mean,
I also really like, sorry.
I mean, like you said, Stetson Bennett was their quarterback, but if he happens to step in and give them, I guess, that competent backup sort of thing moving forward, like that's not the worst pick in the world. And especially too, because it was a 4th round pick. It's not as if they spent, a 2nd or a 1st round pick getting Stetson Bennett. And, so it's just, but my favorite pick of theirs was Puka Nacua.
Yeah. Okay.
So I really like Puka Nacua. I think he's going to be a really good player.
Out of necessity though, more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think in a way too, him being drafted to the Rams might have actually worked out in his favor for his career going forward because there is no one really there.
Yeah,
like it's him and Cooper Kupp. Like that's and Van Jefferson's there.
He'll be good, and they really like Ben Skoranek as well. I think that they also do want to get Tutu Atwell more involved finally. I mean, you got to remember he was a second round pick a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then they have brought in DeMarcus Robinson as well, who I think they like, and I think that might get some usage as well. So yeah, I know what you mean though. But the low key pick that I actually really liked from the draft was Zach Evans.
Yeah.
And he was sort of getting a lot of love from like fantasy people late in like February, sort of around the combine time, because he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Now he's sort of like lost a lot of stock through college and through injuries and things like that. And then he lost a lot of draft capital as well. But I think he's landed in a really good spot. I don't think that Sean McVay is completely tied to Cam Akers, like the way people sort of say he is. I don't think that relationship, again, I think a lot of what the Rams are doing are mostly out of just necessity. Like, oh, well, we need a running back. You may as well stay. Like, you know.
Well, I mean, and even last year, if people cast their minds back 12 months, Cam Akers asked to be traded. He was told to stay away from the team, and they couldn't find a trade partner for him.
People have just forgotten that.
And then he came back and he started getting more use. Like he started getting more touches. It's that joke that they've been saying on the Ringer about every time he tried to quit, he got promoted, and then he's
Seinfeld.
Yeah,
yeah.
So yeah, I'm in agreement with you. It's hard. Like they seem like they've got enough. Like their good players are like really, really good upper echelon sort of guys. It's just I guess the thing is like, are those guys going to be, what's the word? Are those upper echelon guys going to be so good that they pull out a few more wins than what a lot of people are expecting just because of that connection with Stafford and Cup? And, we even saw last year, like Cooper Kupp was on pace to absolutely obliterate the record for number of catches by a wide receiver in a season. Yeah. Just because Matthew Stafford was just going to target him the entire time. Like he was just, so, that could happen again this year. Like that's where a lot of people in the fantasy world are so high on Cooper Kupp, because Matthew Stafford just might funnel every single pass to Cooper Kupp and see what happens from there. But they'll be an interesting team this year to see where they go. I think they're around that 6-ish win mark at best, I think. But
yeah, look, I think that they'll probably get more than 4 wins like I've projected. So I should update this, but I can't see it being too many. But I can also see them being the worst team in the NFL. So yeah.
Yeah, well, speaking of the other team, which a lot of people have said might be the worst team in the NFL, is the Arizona Cardinals, whose over-under win total is 4.5. I guess their main losses, they lose Zach Allen and Byron Murphy, but their biggest loss really is going to be that Kyler Murray is still on the PUP list at the moment, so we know that he's not going to be there for the first 4 games.
Yeah.
It looks like they've obviously, in cut-down day, they've released Colt McCoy after they traded for Josh Dobbs, and so they've got Josh Dobbs, Clayton Tune as their 2 quarterbacks for this year. But
and also, I was like DeAndre Hopkins was their other big sort of let go.
Yeah.
I think that was the right thing to do. I keep hearing that Budda Baker wants out of Arizona as well, so they might lose him. And did you mention Isaiah Simmons to the Giants?
No, I forgot to mention. So he was just traded recently for, was that a 6th round pick?
No, I think I thought it was higher than that. I thought it was more like a 4th or a 5th, but
something like that. But
having an absolute fire sale there in Arizona.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Budda Baker has made it known that he wants to get out of Arizona, because they do appear to be on the, I guess, the tank for Caleb Williams type of, or at least that first pick, because if they do decide to keep Kyler Murray, that's where they may auction off to the highest bidder that first overall pick if they happen to get it. But I don't have a lot to say about Arizona, to be honest. I liked what they did in the draft by getting Paris Johnson, BJ Ojolari I like, but I like the fact that they were able to move around and accumulate so many draft picks for next year's draft, because when you're sort of, I guess, devoid of talent is probably the word, you need as many darts to throw at the dartboard as possible. So if you can load up on, even if it's 3rd round picks, what they've got in next year's draft, like we've seen in years past. So there's a lot of quality guys who come out of that third round. So if you could just load up and just try and pick as much talent up as possible in that draft, like I like that idea from them, what they've done, because it's just, okay, we might not be good, but we're going to try and see what we can pull off next year and then go from there. So you got any thoughts on the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, it's the thing I do find most interesting about them is for a team that we hang so much shit on at the moment, like their best attribute has been the drafts. The draft's just gone and the draft that will come. Like they've got Carolina's pick and Bryce Young, by all accounts, he's a rookie quarterback. We don't know what we're going to see out of Carolina. There's a chance that they might not be very good. There's a chance that the Cardinals might have 2 top 10 picks. So they've got a lot of power there. Like you're saying, that they're letting go of all their sort of not veteran talent, but all their sort of like playmakers are on their way out, aside from Buda Baker, who's still there, and Kyler Murray's still there. They brought in LJ Collier from Seattle, which I think, again, it's just like all these guys who are just kind of like nothing. They're nothing guys. But if you look at their draft, for example, like you were saying, like Paris Johnson was a great pick for where they were. BJ Ojulari, I had him as a first round grade. We were saying on draft night, I thought he would go in the first round, but he did. Michael Wilson was a good pick out of Stanford. He's a good wide receiver. He's a big body as well. So for a team that's got a bunch of little guys, he'll be a nice sort of big body in that receiver room. And then Clayton Tune, like I've been talking about him a lot, but in all seriousness, round 5 pick for, PFF's highest graded quarterback. Not bad at all. I think he could be good. I think he'll definitely be starting some games. We don't know if he's going to start week 1. Having said that, it could be Josh Dobbs, who I heard he has a good relationship with the offensive coordinator, who has just slipped my mind for now, Drew Petzing. And week 1 against the Commanders, they've got to go to Washington. I think it might be like a good place to start. I know that they're 7-point dogs in that game, and that's not a great thing that you want against Sam Howell and his sort of like first start of 2023. But, like they play the Texans. They could win the game. They could beat the Rams. They can beat the Commanders week 1. Crazier shit has happened. It's not, this time last year, we would have been saying like, oh my God, the 49ers get to go to Chicago and smash the Bears. And the Bears won that game. Like stranger things have happened here. Speaking of, the Cardinals play the Bears as well. So like that could conceivably be another win. And then they kind of just need one of these like tougher matchups. Like it's football, man. Like football is a crazy sport. Something could fall their way. And then all of a sudden, like, like there's a lot of good, like Caleb Williams. Okay, he's awesome. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks in this draft class coming up. Like Drake May, very good. They might have a high, like some teams might have a higher grade on Drake May than they do Caleb Williams. Now, that might be right now. I don't think that'll be the case at the end of the season. But then, there's Michael Penix, there's Sam Hartman, there's lots of really good players. Like Bo Nix might just sort of suit their offense. So we'll see. The only other thing I'll say about them is the Jonathan Gannon hire. I'm finding very hard to get excited about. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think it sounds bad that most people, whenever I've spoken to them about what are your thoughts on Gannon, and everyone's first thoughts is that behind the scenes video where he met Rondale Moore and everything. He's like, did the shots, explosives, pew pew pew. Like that's everyone's first thought on him.
Sort of doing his best. I'm trying to think of the guy from Succession. He really reminds me of Kendall Roy.
Kendall Roy, yeah.
And like he has that thing about him, like some people have been saying that the thing about when he was on the Eagles is Howie Roseman was sort of like, hey, here's my credit card, go and spend it because I want to go to the Super Bowl. And he brought in such supreme talent. And I think he was on the Colts before then, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. I can't remember.
But so even with that being said, like the Eagles had a really good defense, but they had a good defense because they had a lot of talent. They didn't necessarily have a good defense because of anything that I think Jonathan Gannon was particularly doing. And even you got to remember in that sort of first season that he was their defensive coordinator, like they got to the playoffs, but they got to the playoffs because of their offense, right? Because they had Jalen Hurd, because they had AJ Brown, because they had Devonta Smith and all like these like really key pieces, and then a lot of good pieces on defense. So I know that when we first started potting together, we were sort of saying like, oh yeah, Shane Steichen, he's on the hot seat because he's got his guy and he's on his way out. And then I felt like Jonathan Gannon was in a better position because none of these players are his guy. He can clean house if he wants to. But like eventually in a few years, like the check will come due and they're going to have to start winning games. And I wonder if they will.
And the other thing is too, usually I would get there and say, with Gannon, he's got a couple of years to try and pick his guy and whatever, and pick his guys and his team. But as we've seen the last couple of years, like Urban Meyer didn't even last the whole season. We saw Nathaniel Hackett last year only last 1 year as head coach. So teams are now more willing to move on from coaches if they don't look like they're going to meet their expectations. So, I'm not saying that's going to happen to Jonathan Gannon, but it's one of those things that you're going to have to look at now to sort of go, well, some of these people aren't as patient anymore with the coaches in the first year. And if they don't look very good, they won't be there for too long at all. So that would be it.
A few good head coaching options at the end of this season. Like I think Ben Johnson's going to be up there. Dan Quinn eventually will probably want some sort of coaching position. And then there's plenty of other guys around the league who are going to be in really good positions. So yeah.
Ajiro Evero could be on his way out of Carolina.
Yeah.
So, and that's where me as a Carolina fan saying like they put together this great cast of coaches, but they're also very aware that come the end of the season, half of these guys could be gone. Like someone might like Josh McCown as an offensive coordinator role, so he could be gone. Or someone might, Josh McCown interviewed with the Texans a couple of years ago. So, nothing would surprise me in the NFL anymore, it seems like. So I think now we can move on to the AFC. So we'll start with another team in LA in the Chargers. The Chargers lose Drew Tranquill and Kyle Van Noy, and they had Nasir Adderley, who retired at, I think he was 25 or 26. He's retired. He was a really good safety. Their main, additions I've got here on this were Eric Kendricks. My question is, so their over-under is 9.5 wins. So I've got two questions for you. One, what's your thoughts on their over-under win total? But two, do you think that the off-season turmoil with Austin Eckler will have an effect on him and how that team maybe gels throughout the season? Because he was given permission to seek a trade, couldn't find it, and he stuck around. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on those, the over-under win total and the Austin Eckler piece and some of the other changes that have happened in LA this year?
Yeah, well, I feel like you buried the lead with the off-season additions. I mean, the biggest one for them is not even going to be on the field. He's going to be on the sideline in Kellen Moore. Like, I think that's probably got to be one of the most exciting parts for them. They brought in Corey Linsley from Green Bay. That was this season, right? And Eric Kendricks.
No, that was a couple seasons ago. So he's been there for a couple seasons now.
Sebastian Joseph Day. I'm pretty sure, was that this season?
I think that was last season as well, like the start of it.
I need to update my notes. So to answer your second question, Austin Eckler, look, he is probably I think we all rate him really highly because we love him for fantasy. I am not sure that he is a key cog in the wheel. I think that I'm a true believer that, it's really important to establish a really fundamental, solid run game. Austin Eckler, Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, Elijah Dotson. That, to me, is not a solid foundational running back room. Having said that, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnson, Josh Palmer, Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, these guys, these are a really good receiving room. So I know that they're going to want to get back to being sort of like a run-heavy team because they were so pass heavy, again, out of necessity, but they didn't really address the position. They Austin Eckler wanted more money, didn't get it. They said, go test the market. Is he annoyed about that? Sure. That's not enough that's not going to be enough to stop him playing football. And I think that the Chargers will still be good. So I've got them second in the division. I've got them going 11-6. So potentially making the playoffs. 4-2 in their own division. Again, it's the same thing with the NFC West. There's two very, very good teams, and then there's two not so good teams at this stage. So they kind of sneak through advantage of that. I think they're going to be way healthier than they were last year as well. Hopefully they can stay healthy. Yeah, I've got like, and the main thing for me with this team is Brandon Staley has to do well. He has to win, otherwise he's gone.
Yeah, there was talk that maybe Brandon Staley might have been gone at the end of last year for how the season finished, especially being up, was it 24-0 or 27-0 in that playoff game against Jacksonville?
It was, wasn't it?
Or 27-7 or something.
Or something like that. Yeah.
But, so that, but there's also the fact too that this team really is all in for this year, and because you look at they've restructured the contracts of guys like Keenan Allen, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. Like they're pushing that money further down the road. Well,
Yeah.
as you mentioned before, like that check's going to come due soon.
Yeah.
And and like a Mike Williams, and they've just re-signed Justin Herbert to his massive extension now. They've been able to bring these guys in over the last couple of years because Justin Herbert's been on his rookie contract.
Yep.
Once that starts to change over to
yeah, those days will be over soon.
Yeah, once that changes over, that makes it then harder to. I mean, teams still do it, but there's a lot more cap wiggle room that they have to maneuver around to get these guys in to try and do that. So to me, this seems like this is their all in sort of. This could potentially be their last year of being all in, just based off of what might happen come the end of next season, because these guys that we mentioned that they've restructured their contracts are getting older.
Yeah.
Whether they'll keep them around or if they decide to cut bait and move on, especially if Brandon Staley doesn't make it through the year and someone else comes in and he becomes the guy, they might want to pick their own guys. But yeah, I did bury the lead a little bit in the upgrade of the OC from Joe Lombardi to Kellen Moore. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
In your mind, what is the scenario where Brandon Staley doesn't get fired? Game? Going a bit further?
It would have to be, you
know what I mean? Like if they make the playoffs, that's fine. But I feel like if they lose another playoff game, he's gone.
I think if he can get them, so they have to win their first playoff game.
Yeah.
And they either have to so let's just say that they do finish second in the division, they end up in the wildcard game. So to me, they've got to win the wildcard game that they play. And then they need to, if they don't win the next round, like the divisional games, it would have to be like a close sort of game. So how we've seen the last couple of years, like the Bills Chiefs, the 13-second game where the Chiefs went down 13 seconds, they win in overtime. If they lose to a game like that in say the second round or the AFC Championship game, Brandon Staley keeps his job. But if they don't make the playoffs, or if they get into the playoffs and they're out round one, what do they do there? Like,
I don't know. I think the one, like, I don't see him losing his job through the season. They start with the Dolphins. I think that they could win that game. They go to Tennessee, then they play the Vikings, the Raiders, Cowboys, and then they got some divisional matchups. But they got the Bears as well. So, like, they've got some very winnable games through the season as it starts out. The thing I like most about the Kellen Moore hire is it's like, Kellen, you focus on the offense. That's you. That's what you do. And then it gives Brandon Staley a chance to just completely focus on this defense. Like, hopefully, Asante Samuel can take a step forward. Hopefully, Derwin James can be the guy that they drafted him to be and that they've always sort of really wanted him to be. Like, I think he's always been a fine safety.
He just needs to stay healthy.
I think JC Jackson, who I think he might still be injured, I'm not entirely sure, but they brought him in to be a really key cog in this wheel. They got Joey Bosa. Eric Kendricks, I kind of think he was a whatever player in Minnesota. I didn't think too much of him. Khalil Mack is still there, though. He can make a huge impact. Yeah, I think that this defense is primed to be strong, and they were strong over the last few weeks of the season outside of that playoff game.
The only way that Brandon Staley goes during the season and is fired as coach, if they happen to be 2-6 and they've got a fully healthy team, like if everyone's fully healthy, But
Yeah.
you get there, if you get there week 8, week 9, and you sit there and everyone's watching going, what is this team? Like they were a playoff team last year, and now they don't look like they could beat, you know, SMU in, like, if they were playing SMU in a game, like, you know, that's a way that I could. That's about the only way that I could see the Brandon Staley would be gone during the year.
What do you think of either my comments on Austin Eckler or the running back room, or like, how would you answer your question that you put forward?
I think that Austin Eckler I think the drop off between Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly. Now, Joshua Kelly's had a much better training camp preseason, and they think that he may be hitting that sort of mark where they were hoping that he was going to be when they drafted him. Isaiah Spiller as well. Like, I think there's a big improvement in their play, like the backup sort of to Austin Eckler, because as Austin Eckler has mentioned previously, that all he's been looking for is a decent running back who can come in and spell him and pick up protections, and that's why he's had to play so much in the last previous years, is because they couldn't trust the other running backs. So if you're able to spell him that little bit more, you might actually get a bit more out of Austin Eckler than what he's been able to show. Like, so he might, he's producing because of volume. He now might be able to produce on less volume but more explosives if he's able to get more rest, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think he might have a pretty deep. I think, and maybe Joshua Kelly too, they might have more important roles in this team just based off of Kellen Moore, if we can try and extrapolate what he did in Dallas with having the two running backs in Zeke and Tony Pollard.
Yeah.
If he
Huge difference between Zeke and Pollard and Eckler and Josh Kelly.
Yeah, but I think like if he can try and bring those same sort of concepts,
yeah,
over, then you might see, that running back room. But I think the good thing is too, there's actually, I know that they don't necessarily have the greatest amount of salary cap space, but there is still guys out on the open market that they can go and pick up during the season if they need to help. Kareem Hunt's still a free agent. Leonard Fournette's still a free agent. Like, I'm not saying that these guys are world beaters anymore, but they're still quality players. So they're still out there. So if they need them, they're there. So, it'll just be interesting to see what happens during the season for them.
And just lastly on their draft class, how do you rate the first round pick, Quinn Johnson?
I struggle a bit with him.
Yeah, because so do I, right? And I struggled with him. Like, I know he was impressive last year at TCU, but like some of the competition he was playing against, you can see why he was so easily able to dominate them. Now, I understand that what they needed is the opposite, is the exact inverse of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, who are elite at catching the ball, but the yards after the catch just isn't there. And that's what Quentin Johnson does specialize in. I think it might take him a while to get going, is my thing.
Yeah, it's really difficult. He was always my biggest when I was looking at guys in the draft. Like, I like his talent and what he could be, but he's also very hard to try and figure out, his role within this offense. Like you said, it's the complete opposite of what Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are in terms of what he can do. But it's also one of those things. I don't know. It's really hard. You can't quite put your finger on the exact wording as to why you're like.
No, that's exactly how I feel. It's like there's just something. Like, I know he can go up, he can catch the ball, he can get it in space. He's a fine route runner. Like, there's nothing wrong with his route running, but there's just something about him.
It's like, I always remember as a kid, when you used to climb up trees and stuff like that, and you'd be up quite high, and then all of a sudden you'd look down and you'd get that uneasy feeling, and you're like, I got up here, I'm perfectly fine, I can climb back down. But you just had that thought at the back of your mind where you're like, oh, it's a similar sort of thing. Like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I like his talent, I like what he could do, I like how he could do this. But then there's just something at the back of your mind going, what is it? I can't quite put my finger on it, what it actually is that makes me hesitate on pulling the trigger and saying, yeah, he's the guy, like, he's their guy that they need, sort of thing. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I think, like you, I think the Chargers are going to go over that 9.5.
Yeah.
win total that we have them there. So move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously losing Derek Carr, Darren Waller this offseason, bringing in Jimmy G, Marcus Epps from Philly, and Jacoby Myers, who has already scored a touchdown for the Las Vegas Raiders last year when he was playing on New England with his beautiful lateral to Chandler Jones for the
I didn't know where you're going with that. That's excellent.
So, but I mean, Las Vegas's over under win total 6.5. I struggle to see them get to over that 6.5 wins. I struggle to see them get to 7. But what about you? What's your thoughts on the Raiders?
Now this is the one team that I must just be completely wrong on. I really need to track this out again because I had them going 1-16. Now I don't think that they're a completely 1-16 team, obviously, but man, I think that these wins for them, they're going to be a dime a dozen. They've got to play the Broncos. They've got to play, the AFC West and that defense. They've got to play the NFC North. So they'll play the Packers and the Bears, the Vikings, the Lions. Look, they should win some games there. They've got to play the Jets. They've got some tough matchups there. And the Colts as well. So, yeah, if you said to me, I honestly think with the preseason that Aiden O'Connell's been having, the quarterback out of Purdue, who's done really, really well. I know he's listed behind Brian Hoyer on the depth chart at the moment. I honestly believe that he starts some games this year, whether that's through Jimmy G getting injured or I don't want to say not playing well because I think Jimmy G is a good player. I don't think it's just all Kyle Shanahan luck that he's played in the Super Bowl and he's taken the team to those sort of elite heights. Not saying Jimmy G's elite. Let's be clear about that. But yeah, I just think that this team has just always been sort of sticky taped together, if that makes sense. They've got good pieces. They've got fundamental foundations there, players Max Crosby, fantastic player. Chandler Jones is there this season. I think he'll be good. Marcus Peters has come across. They've got players who are these great names, but then they've got Divine Diablo. So what? Jerry Tillery. So what? These are players from other teams that have just never sort of been anything. This secondary, it just feels like it's nothing. It's Nate Hobbs, David Long from the Rams.
Yeah, it's one of those things. They've got maybe the best or second best wide receiver in the NFL in Devontae Adams. He's still there. So you've got Jimmy G's got his target. He can throw to.
Yeah.
But I think describing Jimmy G is using a Robert Mays quote. He's a perfectly fine quarterback.
Yeah.
He's not great. He's not poor. He's just perfectly fine. He's that middle of the road sort of type of quarterback who you can put in and try not to make terrible rookie mistakes sort of thing. But my thought process on them is I mentioned it on the Saturday Air Raid when we did the take purge preseason thing that Jacorian Bennett is an outside for defensive rookie of the year, just based on the fact that I think that they could be on the field a lot. The defense could be on the field a fair bit, just because I don't have a lot of faith in that offense. But we've seen Josh Jacobs has now come back to the team. Josh Jacobs is back after his mini holdout that he had. He signed a 1-year deal, but
that's a huge piece for them.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting though. This is another team who, in a way, reminds me of the Rams. They've got pieces, but then at the same time, they also sort of feel like they're in a rebuild at the same time.
They always feel like they're in a really competitive rebuild. Like this draft class. First round pick, so Tyree Wilson, great player. Do they need him? Second round pick, Michael Mayer, fantastic player. Do the Raiders need him? Young, Trey Tucker, Jacorian Bennett, like you were saying, okay, so that's good. Aiden O'Connell has proved to be good. But these guys, it's oh yeah, they picked some really good guys. Those guys are really good. But then you look at their team and but wait, is the team good now? Are they better?
Yeah, it's They're a hard team to figure out. I'm like you. I have them under 6.5. I don't think they will get to 6. Like I'm sort of thinking more in that 3 to 5 ish sort of range this season. But yeah, they're just a difficult team. So
Yeah, look, their winnable games will be against the Colts, assuming they're not injured late in the season. Bears, we don't know how they're going to go. Packers could be winnable. And then I suppose they have to win something in their division. So
not necessarily.
they are competitive.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the defending Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, who lose. Well, actually, first, their over-under is 11.5 wins. Their main losses, they lose Orlando Brown Jr., who's gone to Cincinnati. Frank Clark has left. Juju Smith-Schuster has left as well. Their big ins really were Charles Omenihu, which he's actually going to be on the suspended list for the first 6 games as part of a domestic violence issue that happened while he was with the San Francisco 49ers. Jawan Taylor, who they signed from Jacksonville, who by all reports was actually going to be signed to play their left tackle position. And then once all the dust settled of major free agency, they're actually able to sign Donovan Smith from Tampa Bay to play left tackle. So it looks as if they're going to keep Jawan Taylor on that right tackle spot. So Kansas City over under 11.5 wins. What's your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, so you're not going to believe this. I've got them going over. I've got them going 14-3. And look, I can see a world in which they sort of take a semi-step back. But I also said last year that I could see a world in which they take a slight step back. And they basically did anything but that. They won a Super Bowl, and well, you know, Patrick Mahomes was MVP. So, you know, can't ever count them out. This is just a really good team with really, really good pieces everywhere. This is a team that has, did I hear they have like the youngest defense or the second youngest defense in the NFL? And that was
last year they were the second youngest defense in the NFL, and they're going to be the second youngest defense in the NFL this year.
Yeah, who cares? Doesn't matter. They're the Chiefs. They've got Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Nothing matters. They're just like a black hole just sailing through the NFL, you know, galactical vortex of just sucking everyone up and destroying everything in their path. Like, it doesn't matter that the top 3 wide receivers on the depth chart right now are Marcus Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, and Sky Moore. Like, who cares? They got Travis Kelce. Low key, but like they've got some fantastic players on defense as well. L'Jarius Sneed is honestly one of my favorite players in the league. I love watching him. Trent McDuffie was a great pick last season. He played really, really well in his first season.
Jalen Watson was there. He played really well for him as well.
Yeah, exactly. George Karlaftis, I thought was good in pieces as well. Willie Gay's a great player. Nick Bolton's a great player.
Nick Bolton played fantastic in that Super Bowl. He could have been up there for Super Bowl MVP. He played that well in that game.
Yeah, insane. Even like, and then it's like how like they're never in a particularly good position to draft well or to draft like elite players, but they somehow always do really well. Like first round pick Felix Inaduke Zama, he's a really good pick for them. Like Rashee Rice, I don't know. Like he might be good. Like he's had a tough preseason, even though he has sort of been a centerpiece. But yeah, I think that they, all things considered, put together a good draft.
And I think too, one of their big things going to be this year is actually he did make the 53-man roster. Is Justin Ross,
right?
Talent alone, he should have been a first-round pick. Talent alone, he had some pretty rough medicals, which actually made him to become an undrafted free agent who injured himself in preseason last year and was out for the entire season. He has looked fantastic in this preseason, and he's actually
I think he was on the NFI list because of his college injury carried over into the NFL season.
Yeah, so his
preseason just gone, do you mean?
Last season. So he's there, like he's been playing with the ones in the preseason, so they were obviously very high on him. And Patrick Mahomes has been singing his praises all off season. It doesn't matter who they
Imagine your like college and NFL career. You go from Trevor Lawrence to Patrick Mahomes.
The thing is, when you look back at his talent in that team, he was the best wide receiver on that Clemson National Championship team. And that team
I
had
mean,
teeth.
Pro and
But he on that team when he was at Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, like you look at that team, they had Trevor Lawrence, they had Travis Etienne,
yeah,
but the wide receivers on that team were T. Higgins and Hunter Renfro,
yeah, that's who I was thinking. Yeah,
and
and
he was the best of them. Like he is super talented. He's just had these terrible injuries, but I think the biggest thing for me at the moment is Chris Jones.
yeah,
He got some votes last year for Defensive Player of the Year. He is actually saying that he is willing to. He's made enough money, and he's actually mentioned this. He's made enough money. He'll sit out games this year.
he's
He
doing.
wants,
He's
yeah,
already losing the money. Like he must listen to the Athletic Football Show because he's like, man, I'm fucking good.
but he pretty much he's willing, and he's already, yeah, as you mentioned, he's already losing money. He wants by the sounds of it, he wants a record setting contract for a defensive tackle, which is Aaron Donald at about $31 million a year.
Yeah.
I think the Chiefs were sort of thinking more like Quinnen Williams with a few million on top sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you think he's worth it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you were to, I think, and multiple people have said this too, like the two of the smartest guys I like listening to are Robert Mason, Nate Dice, and both of them have got there and said that if Aaron Donald didn't exist, the NFL would talk about Chris Jones the way that they talk about Aaron Donald.
Yeah.
Like, so I look, I would say, actually, let me rephrase my answer.
He had a really good season last year.
He had a really good season. I would say yes, based off of the money now, on how people are being paid and everything like that. But if you were to say right now, if Aaron Donald came and said if just say they were both free agents and they both went to Jacksonville, for instance, and said, right, give us your best offer, Aaron Donald would probably get offered more than what Chris Jones would get, but it wouldn't be such a big discrepancy that you would sit there and go, can you believe that they're paying Chris Jones $29 million per year and Aaron Donald's getting,
yeah,
$68 million a year? Like it's not that discrepancy, but it's close enough that you can't really, I guess you wouldn't really bat an eyelid if they came out and they said, in a week before the season starts, that Chris Jones is coming back and he signed a contract where he's making $30 million a year.
Yeah.
You're not going to be like, wow, that's a massive overpay. But yeah, I'm with you with the Chiefs being over, but I think everything just revolves around number 15 and number 87 on the offense.
Yeah.
Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, and one of the stats that that's just insane to hear about Travis Kelce is every year since 2016, Travis Kelce's had over 80 catches and over 1,000 yards a season since 2016.
Yeah.
That's just, you can understand why people say that he is the best best tight end of all time. Like some of those numbers are just insane. And as long as he's on the team, the Chiefs are always, with Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs are just going to be competitive just because they've got those two.
That's how I feel. Do you think they'll go back to the Super Bowl?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think they'll at least be in the championship game.
Yeah.
I think the AFC is so stacked this year that you could tell me one of about 5 teams are going to make it from the AFC, and I'd believe every single one of them.
Yeah.
Like if you tell me that it's the Dolphins going to make it, the Bills, the Bengals, the Jets even, or the Chiefs, like I'd take all of them and go, yeah, I believe that. Yeah. You could tell me the Ravens are going to do it. Like there's 6 teams there. I'm like, yep, they could do it. Like, you know what I mean? So there's so many teams there that I could see do it, but I think they'll be right up in that same sort of area they've been the last couple of years as Super Bowl, or if not making it to the Super Bowl, at least the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, like this is how I feel. Like you're telling me that last year was the second youngest defense in the league, and they're only going to get better together. Like if this is going to be a very, very good defense, and you've got Mahomes and Kelce on the other side of the ball, like I can't. Like it's insane to think that they could be even better.
Yeah, and I mean Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defensive coordinators going around in football. So to have him there as well just elevates that team along with Andy Reid to a level which is just makes football fun to watch, to see these guys be able to do week in week out what they're able to do.
Yeah.
So moving on to our last team, and we'll try not to spend as too much time on them as we have some of these other ones. Denver.
Fun one to talk about.
Denver are 8.5 wins. I had them way under. Their losses, they lose Draymond Jones, Deshaun Williams, Graham Glasgow. You can also add to that Tim Patrick's gone again for this season with his injury. They cut KJ Handler because of a heart injury. Yep. Jerry Jeudy's injured at the moment. So very thin at wide receiver. Marquee additions, they've got they signed Mike McGlinchey, Ben Powers, trying to boost that offensive line. Zach Allen, they bring in from Arizona, and then obviously part of the Sean Payton revival is bringing Adam Troutman in from trading for him from New Orleans, because he's a guy who Sean Payton drafted there. So I have Denver under 8.5 wins. What's your thoughts, John?
I've actually got them 9 and 8. Because I just cannot quit this defense, man. I think they're the best in the league. Let's have a look at, I think bringing in Sean Payton is going to definitely be one of the best things that they could do. Justin Simmons, I think, is an absolute stud. Pat Surtain, absolute stud. They've got Frank Clark. They've got Jonathan Harris. They've got DJ Jones. They've got some elite players. Josie Jewell, I think, is still going to be good. Randy Gregory's come across as well. I think that's going to be an amazing piece for them. Was that this offseason that Randy Gregory was like, hey, Dallas, I'm with you, and then last minute just took off?
That was last offseason.
Last offseason. Okay. Are we sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he only played a few games last year before he got injured. I think he did his ACL or something last year, so he didn't play for I don't think he played a huge amount of games last year for Denver.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they'll have Kareem Jackson as well, who I also really, really like. So I think that there's some really stud pieces here. I actually quite like Vance Joseph as a defensive coordinator. Getting to the offensive side of the ball, this is where things get really, really murky, because I'm not sure that Russell Wilson and Sean Payton are exactly getting along. The other thing is, for Russ to succeed, he's losing pieces. Like you said, he's lost Jerry Jeudy for at least, I'm thinking 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks.
Mm.
We talked about the other receivers who have just gone, and then they went on an absolute cutting spree today in the 53 cut down. I think Lil Jordan Humphrey, I know Sean Payton quite likes him. I think he might get elevated from the practice squad. Wouldn't be surprised as well if Kendall Hinton comes back to the practice squad. And Montreal Washington as well. I know had some good catches last season. So there's players there that they could bring back up. I mean, they're going to have to. They've only got 3 guys.
Mm.
They've got Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton, and Brandon Johnson, who I don't even know who Brandon Johnson is.
No, I'm a bit the same. But my big question for them, though, is my big question is the Russell Wilson we saw last year, is that the Russell Wilson, is that who he is now? Or was last year just a blip?
He's got to be better. It was historic last year.
He was, but we see sometimes with some quarterbacks that they hit a point where their play just drops dramatically. We've seen that so many times with quarterbacks, their play just drops dramatically and they're no longer that person they were. But is Russell Wilson, is he one of those guys, or is Russell Wilson one of those guys who just he tried too hard in his first year? Nathaniel Hackett was there and instead of installing maybe his ideal playbook and his ideal sort of thing, it was too much input from Russell Wilson. Now you've got Sean Payton, who's going to come in and pretty much go, no, this is the offense. I don't necessarily care that you don't like some of these plays. This is how we're going to do it. Is that going to then sort of give Russell Wilson that sort of structure that might help him succeed?
My thing with Russell Wilson, and I had expressed these thoughts on the internet before, but the thing about Russ when he started out in Seattle is he came in during an era where it was like Cam Newton was like the rushing dual threat guy, and before that we had seen guys like from the Eagles and the Falcons. Slip my name right now.
Michael Vick.
Yeah, Michael Vick. Thank you. Like the dual threat quarterback didn't really exist like 10 years ago. I mean, there was also like Colin Kaepernick and stuff like that. But the idea of Russ, like defenses really struggle to defend young mobile quarterbacks like Russ. That's just not the case anymore. Like defenses have finally caught up where we see them all the time. We see Lamar Jackson, we see Kyler Murray, see Josh Allen, we see all these sort of dual threat guys come through the system now. And all of a sudden we sort of realize like, hey, Russ is actually quite old now. He is quite slow. He's not as mobile in the pocket as he used to be. He would throw up so many prayer balls in Seattle that luckily, like Doug Baldwin would come down with. Luckily, DK Metcalf was able to go up and catch, and it's always along the side. He doesn't throw over the middle of the field, which maybe that's a good thing. There was just this, I felt like, and we sort of touched on this when we were talking about Seattle at the start of the show, there was so much that it felt like Pete Carroll was trying to protect the team from when it came to Russell Wilson, which Richard Sherman has openly spoken about as well. KJ Wright has also openly spoke about as well. Like there were not too many fans there. And man, you saw how fiery people like the defenders were last season when they were returning from the sideline. And it was just like people were getting really upset. Like how different will it be this year? I don't know.
I think the thing is too, with a coach like Sean Payton, if Russell doesn't start to pan out, the ownership group there is more than like we'll side with Sean Payton.
Yeah, of course. They paid them both so much money.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like Russ has got that new contract extension, and he's he can make that sort of that money and whatever sort of thing. But Sean Payton is one of those coaches too who, if he had to bench Russell Wilson just to prove a point in a game, he wouldn't be afraid to do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, they are such a difficult team. Like I've got a few Denver Broncos fans in my life. Shout out to Nate Polvo.
Sorry, Nate.
Yeah, but it's just speaking with some of them sometimes, and especially last season, it was just a lot of I am so frustrated, man. Like that's pretty much everything. They're like, we're not sure what he's doing, and you even saw the start of the season. What was it, week 2, when the crowd was counting down the play clock so they could get the plays off and things like that. Like if that was just because last year was an absolute shit show with Nathaniel Hackett as coach, like you chalk last year, you just pretty much just throw it away. You don't worry about it, but. Sean Payton's obviously too. He's also had this. He said he left his analyst hat on where he went on the tirade and said that Nathaniel Hackett was one of the worst coaching jobs he's ever seen in the NFL in his preseason, and that really upset Aaron Rodgers and things like that. So Sean Payton's doing himself no favors by putting a target on his back by saying things like that. But I mean, I do really like their defense. I love Pat Surtain. Like he's to me, he's right up there in that conversation for best cornerback in the league. Like he's right up there in that. He's just a superstar. But I think the big question for them really is Russell Wilson last year's Russell Wilson, or is he the Seattle Russell Wilson? That's going to be the big thing. That'll determine whether they can actually be a successful team this year or not.
For sure. And like, look, here's how the season starts. Raiders, football team, Dolphins, Bears, like those are some winnable games. They're all winnable.
They are, but then as well, like
defense.
I mean, they're all winnable, but then at the same time, if you tell me that they're 0-4, I also wouldn't be shocked by that either. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just they're that team who they probably should be at worst. At worst, they should be like maybe 2-2 at worst. After those first 4 games, more likely you'd hope if you're a Broncos fan that they were 3-1 or 4-0. But if you were to come and tell me after that stretch of games that they're 1-3 or 0-4, like,
Yeah.
that also wouldn't surprise me as well. So,
But look, I mean, I think that's part of it. Is that's where I've got those 9 wins mostly coming from. Is like Raiders, Commanders. Okay, they play the Bears. They play the Lions at some point. So they're playing the North. They're playing the Vikings. Like I think that they could probably make a sweep of the NFC North. To be honest, because the Packers are going to be playing them in Denver as well. They're going to play the Patriots. Like there's so many just games where I'm like, yeah, I could see them winning that.
There's opportunities to pick up wins as well, but then there also could be that like we were talking about earlier, you come back from the future in a couple of months' time, and if they were to say, 8 weeks into the season, well, Russell Wilson's been benched because they're 1-7. Like you could also go, yeah, that's not out of the realm of possibilities either. Like it
Like think about like this game, for example, even these 2 games, week 16 and week 17, they have the Patriots week 16 coming to them and then the Chargers coming to them week 17 like that. It's going to be cold as hell in Denver. And that's going to be late in the season. It's going to be like really rugged, tough conditions. Like that's like sort of the environment that they could win in, that defense could dominate teams in.
Yeah, they're one of those teams that they've got one of the, to me, they're one of the teams actually that has the biggest variance for this season. Like I've seen some people on your side of thinking and have them around that, hey, this defense is really good. We think Russell Wilson's going to be really good. They're going to be a 9-10 win team this year.
But that wasn't my side of thing. I was like, yeah, I agree. That's what I said. And then I'm like, no.
But like I've seen people sort of be like, yeah, they're definitely over. They're going to be this type of that really good team pushing for like a wild card sort of position.
Yeah.
I've also seen the complete opposite, where some people are going, they could be fighting for maybe not the number 1 pick, but they could be a top 10 pick this year. So, it's and with how stacked some of these divisions and these teams and everything are, like, I'm just ready for the season to start now. Like you can see, there's so much intrigue on this season again.
Yeah,
we've gone through now. That's all 4 divisions. All of the divisions that we've gone through now. So
all 8
division. I think each week of this preseason when we've been doing these, I've had a team in my mind for how I think in these divisions that we've gone through, how I think they're going to play out. And I think by the time we do the next episode that we've done this, I've changed my mind on the order of most of those teams.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that, goes through some of these where, we've obviously got our favorite sorts of teams and where we think they're going to win. But like, to me, one of the biggest ones is the AFC North.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it. Like in my mind, I think it's going to be Cincinnati, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, but you could flip that and I would believe it. But then you could tell me that they're going to have 3 teams that are all 10-7 and I'll believe it. Like it's so hard to predict these teams. It's really, it's going to be a fun season and we're almost there.
Yeah.
We are almost there, guys. So we will leave it there for now. We will have the Saturday Air Raid coming out again this Saturday, hosted by John. We'll go through our 53 players who didn't make the 53-man rosters.
Yeah, or did. Just like
or did.
Players that we're like, oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's going to be a bit more of a rapid fire. We'll just sort of have a quick comment on some of them. Just because otherwise, if that was the case, we might be on those teams for about 17 hours if we because of some of these guys that have or haven't made the teams. But thank you again for listening. We will have some more shows coming for you soon as the season kicks off. We are going to have breakdowns of games on our shows on the Saturday Air Raid. We've got some college stuff that's going to be coming through with any of that.
College season. Yeah, it's exciting.
College season is here. It's exciting. There's some really good games on Australian TV this weekend that I'm looking forward to. Have you got anything that you would like to add, John, before we head out of here?
No, nothing to plug for me at the moment. Just very much looking forward. There's no football to be seen this weekend, which is sad, but then it is going to be a massive crunch to the end of the year.
So if anyone would like to reach out and speak to any of us, you can find me on Twitter at BradBolt1. You can find John at John Lloyd Roberts. You can find us at the NFL at NFL Lab Network. John, thank you again. This has been fun. Probably gone a lot longer than what I was expecting it to, but that's what happens when you get rolling with you. So from John, from myself, we'll see you all guys next week.
Welcome back to the lab. Back to the lab. Welcome back to the lab. Back to the lab.